last week, if you weren't here, Pastor Scott started this series and talked about a scared Jesus. If I said that and you're confused, please understand that Jesus experienced all of the emotions that you and I experience. That was part of his humanity, right? The scripture talks about that he stepped down and gave up his right, and took on the form of a man, and that we know through the Gospels and what we read that he experienced a lot of the emotions that you and I experience. And I'm so grateful that we worship a God, we worship a King, that when we are feeling scared, today we're going to talk about tired, we're going to talk about loneliness, we're going to talk about joy and fun, we're going to talk about sadness, all those things over the next couple weeks here. I'm just so grateful that we worship a King and our God that knows exactly what we're feeling. That is just really encouraging to me. And so today we're going to talk about tired Jesus, and I'm excited about that. I don't know about you, but I feel like as I get a little older, on the other side of the holidays, people are like, how are your holidays? And I almost always say, they were great, they were awesome, they were life-giving, they were fun, and I'm so glad to get on the other side of the holidays. Like, there's something about just the pace and the sprint of the holidays that it's like, I'm really glad that they give my kids 2 weeks off, but please go back to school so I can rest. But today we're going to talk about tired Jesus, and we're gonna expand on this idea of tiredness, and not just a physical tired, like a physical need for rest, but we're going to look and see what Jesus models for us when he talks about tiredness. More importantly, what he talks about when he references rest. Everybody say rest. So we're going to talk about rest today, and I'm hoping that, to be totally honest with you, I'm literally tired as I talk about tired Jesus. I am just, we got 4 girls, that kind of stuff, that whole thing. And so I'm just realizing, like, this is for me as much as it's for you guys. But I want to preface everything I'm about to say with, I really hope that I don't offend you. And I'm not saying that in a joking way, but there might be something today that I say that you're like, Brad, you just do not understand. You're telling me to rest, and I have X, Y, Z that I have to navigate. Like, you are oblivious to my life. Like, all of those things you could probably think today. Can you do me a favor that when those thoughts pop up, would you just take them to the Lord in the moment? Because more than likely, that could be the enemy attempting to remind you that rest, like this soul deep, beautiful rest, life-giving time in God's presence is not for you. And it could be the enemy trying to convince you that rest is for everybody else but you. Just be, when I say something that you're like, whatever, Brad, at that point you should pray, right? At that point you should be like, God, what are you doing? What are you saying to me, Holy Spirit? And go from there. So about a week and a half ago, Laura and I were sitting in the living room. Laura's my wife, sitting in the living room, and we were having one of those talks. That's the only way I can say it. We were having one of those times when we weren't on the same page. I had gotten really angry with the girls just that night. She could tell that I was really impatient with our beautiful 3-year-old. I was just like, I was like a rubber band that if you pulled really hard and you plucked it just way too hard, I would have snapped. It was kind of like one of those things. Has anybody been there before? Because I'm feeling really isolated right now in this moment, okay? Right? Yeah. Thank you. I know everybody's been there, but for some reason when you say that out loud, you feel like you're the only one. And I feel like, again, that's another tactic of the enemy, that he likes to encourage you that you are the only one that struggles with X, Y, Z. And that's just not the case. But we were sitting there on the couch, and we were sitting separate in the living room. We're getting to the age where, like, she has her spot and I have my spot. I don't know, that happened somewhere around like mid-30s. But she's looking at me and she goes, hey, can we talk? And I was like, yeah, we just talk. And she's just sharing her heart about, like, hey, I'm kind of a little upset about this. And I'm like, okay, and almost like 5 minutes into it, I just lost it. That was the 4th time that I have ever, like, not cried in front of my wife, but, like, blubbered in front of my wife. Like sat there and like could not like that. I was just sharing how I feel like at this point, this past year, it was the end of 2024. This past year has been one of the most beautiful yet challenging years of my life. It's not just stepping into Wisconsin with you all, because honestly, this experience has been some of the most beautiful and most fun experiences, but just there's been so much challenge with like transitioning our daughters to Wisconsin, new schools, trying to fix and get our house ready, just like so much, and I feel like it's caught up to me, right? Have you ever had that where just like you realize that you can't stuff the emotions down low enough? And it just catches up with you. And I had that moment. And my wife oozes wisdom. Rather than sitting there and saying, like, trying to fix the problems and that kind of stuff, she looked at me and she goes, Brad, when was the last time you took a solitude day? And I was like, man, you're smart. And pretty. When was the last time you took a solitude day? And I realized that at that point, this was the Spirit reminding me that even as a pastor, the need for my moments where I rest in God's presence is so needed. And friends, today I want you to understand that it's not just people who are in ministry that need that. It's all of you in this room. If you could hear my voice at this moment, you need to experience moments where you get to rest in God's presence, right, and enjoy the fullness of what he has for you. That looks different for different people, right? What does it look like for me to rest in God's presence? What does it look like for me to experience Sabbath? And I'm not talking about the weekly Sabbath, right? Scripture talks about that actually there should be a time each week that you are resting, that you are Sabbathing. A lot of us maybe grew up and you thought that was the day that you had to like sit on your hands and not move at all. I want to just invite you into thinking that Sabbath is a moment that you get to do things that bring you life with God. Mowing my lawn is Sabbath rest for me. I put my AirPods in and I sit there and I listen and I pray and I mow my lawn with my white New Balance shoes. I literally have those, right? And pull up my socks, and that's my rest, right? Other things I love doing, being out in the garage, and I might be cleaning it up and working with my hands, but it is a moment for me to do something that is life-giving with God's presence. Sabbath is not just sitting there and not moving, right? It's sitting there enjoying God's presence and his work in your life. But that's not what we're talking about today. We're talking about rest. We're talking about solitude. We're talking about enjoying the fullness of God's presence in those moments that we absolutely need it. This can happen more than just once a week, too, right? These are moments that you're just realizing I need to be filled because I am just giving or draining or pouring myself out over here and over here and over here and over here. One of my favorite verses in the Bible, it's going to be up on the screen, it's Psalms chapter 23. And I want to read this to you. And this is one of those things. How many of you guys have read Psalm 23 and you've it's on this pretty picture, or it's on a coffee mug, or it's on a t-shirt, it's on a poster. It's something that's like pretty and like life-giving, and you're like, oh, it's like Jesus holding a staff with cute little sheep around him and he's smiling and that kind of stuff. That's what I used to think when I read Psalm 23. But when you read this and realize what this psalm is actually saying, you get this idea that Jesus is taking a firmer shepherding approach of his sheep. All right, I'm going to read this for you guys. Verse 1 of chapter 23 says this: "The Lord is my shepherd, I lack nothing." All right? He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. He guides me along the right paths for his name's sake. I used to read that and I used to picture like he holds my hand and we frolic through the meadow and he's like, do you want to rest here, Brad? Do you want to go enjoy that trickling pond over there? No, you don't want to, Brad, because you got stuff to do. That's totally fine. Maybe the next turn around the meadow you'll do that. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, no, it says he makes me lie down in green pastures. Like he forces me to do that. Like a child who doesn't know what's good for them, Jesus, your shepherd, makes you lie down in green pastures. Even when you sit there and you're kicking and screaming, you're like, I have so much to do. Have you seen my calendar, Jesus? There's a lot of yellow. My calendar's yellow on my phone. There's a lot of yellow on my calendar. Got a lot to do. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. If you have kids or work with young people before, there are times when you have to go do something and they just don't want to, so you grab whatever you can, the back of the coat, their arm, that kind of stuff, in a loving way. I love you so much, and we're going this way, right? He leads me beside quiet waters. And it's this implication that he desires to do that for you, but it sounds like that sometimes we're not open to that. That we're, for some reason, believing that, nope, I don't need to lie down. Obviously, we're not going to go lay down in one of the fields around our church, but it's symbolic. That he looks at us as his sheep, as his children, as, honestly, people that don't know better. Like, I think God knows that if it were up to us, we probably wouldn't ever rest. Because it's always the tyranny of the urgent. What do I have to do? I have to do something. I have to get this done. If I don't get this done now, I'm going to disappoint, fail, blow something up, whatever it is. And Jesus says, I'm going to make you lie down in green pastures. How many of you are uncomfortable at this point? Anybody? Okay, I'll try harder. It's interesting as you talk about this, it's like people get upset internally because they're convicted, because A, they're not resting enough, or they get angry at you. You're like, how dare you tell me to take time for myself and spend time with God, right? I think as a people, we're so almost addicted to this idea of needing to just accomplish the thing, right? I've got this notepad on my desk that I'm trying to be more organized in 2025. And it's got spaces to write tasks on it. And there's 20 spaces a day. And I'm like, I can't finish 20 things in one day. But there's something that's really awesome when I write on the list and I get to check it off. It's done. Ugh. And if I get to the end of the day and there's boxes that aren't checked, I'm like, I have failed. What happens if at the end of the day, the only thing you got to check was you sat in God's presence and you took time for yourself and you rested and you listened to him? And you got to check that off. And that was the only thing you got to do in a day. Would that be successful? It would. It would. Psalm 123. What can we learn about Jesus from rest? All right. A couple of verses that are going to be up on the screen just written out where you find them. Luke 4:42, it says, Jesus goes to a solitary place. Ironically, people came looking for him and wanted something from him at this point. How many of you can resonate with that? I'm just trying to take time for myself, and then all of a sudden there's something that pops up. All right. There's somebody that needs something. All right. Luke 5:16, he withdrew to a lonely place to pray. Matthew 14, by himself to pray, right? This is when he walks on water. He actually lets the boat go ahead of him so that he can take time to rest. But Jesus, how are you going to get to where you need to go? How are you going to accomplish the next thing on your to-do list? And God provides a miraculous moment where he actually walks on water to get to where he needs to go, right? So he prioritizes rest at that point. Mark 6, it says he retreated to pray by himself. Luke 6:12, spent the night by himself to pray. You know, you read that, and that's just a few of them, right? And we can sit there and we can question, like, but Brad, what did he miss out on? Like, what did he not finish? And what did he not do, right? We can speculate, right? There's probably something else he could have been doing or getting done. There's more people to love, care for, pray for, whatever. Like, what was he doing, right? There's probably a group of people he walked away from or separated himself from. There's probably something else he could have done that other people could have thought was more important, right? How many of us do things and really continue to pour out because you believe that it's other people that are setting the pace for your life, right? What else could he given up or walked away from, right? There was probably a long list of stuff he had to get done by this time or something was going to happen. But what we see here is that Jesus prioritized rest. As you read in the Gospels, there are times when he literally walks away and you're like, dude, he just walked away from people that needed him. But what he realized is that he needed rest in order to meet the needs of the people around him. And I think that's one of those things where we tend to rest in response to exhaustion. When we get to a point when we are so tired we can't, okay, that's when I rest. But friends, what if we flip the script and what if we practice rest so that we could do that, right? And instead of filling our bucket when it's completely empty, we just continually fill it up even though there's opportunity that it drains out. I want to show you a story in the book of Mark in chapter 4. And we're going to look at one of these times that Jesus rested. And I think there's two really important things that we can learn from this passage. Mark chapter 4, verse 35, it says this. That day when evening came, he said to his disciples, "Let us go over to the other side." Leaving the crowd behind. I'm sure there was somebody in that crowd that needed something from him. Leaving the crowd behind, they took him along just as he was in the boat. There were also other boats with him. A furious squall came up, and the waves broke over the boat so that it was nearly swamped. Verse 38. Jesus was in the stern, sleeping on a cushion. Did I read that correctly? I did. Yeah, he's sleeping on a cushion. Well, look at that. It says the disciples woke him and said to him, "Teacher, don't you care if we drown?" We'll stop there. He wakes up at that point and he calms the storm, and they realize, who is this man that even the wind and the waves obey him? But what I want us to look at is one of the moments where Jesus finds a period to rest. And what happened? Like, what was the response? And the first thing I want you to see is this. The size of the storm was not big enough to prevent his rest. A furious squall came up. Now, if I was Jesus, I probably would have woken up because that just seems really scary to me, right? But he doesn't. He stays asleep. Even though there's something massive and scary and big that he could give his attention to, he chooses to rest. And I feel like this is a literal storm that Jesus is battling and looking at and sleeping during. But how many of us in life, we're experiencing moments where we have storms in our life, and rather than take and prioritize rest, we sit there and wring our hands and we worry and we're anxious about that storm, when maybe God is asking us to rest during that so that we could listen to him and allow him to guide our footsteps. One of the things as a worrier, and not a warrior, but a worrier, did you hear the difference there? One of the things as a worrier such as myself is that when I face storms, the last thing I want to do is not try and attempt to fix it or rest. I feel like there's something I could do to make this better. And so perhaps for you, maybe in this season, you have things that you are giving your anxiety to. You have things that you are anxious because. You have things that you are worrying about. You have things that are occupying your thoughts in moments of the evening when you should be resting, but you're worrying about that. And I'm just curious if the Spirit today is leading you to perhaps during that to ask God to bring you rest. God, would you bring me your peace so that I can just sit in this moment and rest and let tomorrow deal with that? The storm was not big enough to prevent the rest of Jesus. So often we choose to give ourselves to the immediate crisis ahead of us. It is amazing as somebody that has a job and a family and that kind of stuff, how quickly something could happen that I perceive as a level 10, but it's really a level 2, but I give it a level 10 response. I need to fix this right now. And I will drain myself to the point of exhaustion and get into a really unhealthy place. Rather than sit there and say, God, I don't know what this is, but I'm going to prioritize time with you. I'm going to prioritize rest. I'm going to prioritize time for myself so that perhaps I could be equipped to navigate this storm ahead of me. Work needs me right now. This friend, this relationship, they need me right now. This desire of mine, this passion, this hobby, this job, this task, it needs me right now. And perhaps maybe we should be saying, what do I need right now? Maybe I need to slow down and find rest. Is anybody offended at this point yet? See, I keep on asking that because I realize that as people, it's hard to take time for ourselves. It really is. We battle these feelings of selfishness. We're worried what other people say about us or what they're thinking. I am terrified of disappointing people. I shared that this past week with some friends. It's like, if you want to get to me, just look at me and say, Brad, I'm disappointed in you. And I will sit there and I will prioritize everything else in life, completely ignore my need for rest and solitude and time with God and just time to breathe because I don't want to disappoint people. It's amazing. So, the size of the storm was not big enough to prevent his rest. I think the second thing we see in this specific story with Jesus is other people can't assign the value of your rest. I'm going to read that one more time. My wife and I sat here and I was like, does this make sense? Does this sentence make sense? And we sat there and went back and forth, back and forth. Other people can't assign the value of your rest. You need to. What do you need in this season? What do you need in this situation? What do you need this week? What do you need today? Honestly, I love my wife dearly. I love my kids dearly. I can't look at Laura and tell her how much she needs rest right now or not. I don't know what she's thinking, what she's going through, what she's feeling. I mean, she's open with me and that kind of stuff, but there's still things that, I can't tell you when you need to rest. You need to advocate for yourself. But in this moment, Jesus, if he would have let the disciples dictate the value of his rest, right, we see here, right, they literally question whether or not Jesus knew and loved them and that kind of thing. Don't you care if we drowned? Of course he does. Perhaps maybe the disciples in this point should have realized that during the storm, Jesus was over there not really worrying about it. What if they would have sat there and been like, this is scary, but that dude over there, he's relaxed, he's resting. Maybe we should take his lead on this. But if Jesus would have let the disciples in the boat determine whether or not it was time for him to rest, he would have never fallen asleep. Jesus determined, this is a moment that I need to rest. So as we look at this, we can go both ways on this idea of rest, right? I hope at this point, and I'll make it more clear as we move on, that this idea of rest is not just a physical rest, I need to do that, but actually Jesus leads us in to a more complex and beautiful idea of rest. In Matthew chapter 11, starting at verse 28, it says this. It says, "Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Just some context here. Jesus is saying this after he's listed off these communities and these cities and these groups of people that although they've seen him do miracles, they're still not yet believing. And part of the reason why they're not yet believing is because they have the Pharisees over them who are still holding on to this religion that is heavy and burdensome and works-based. Right? And so they're not able to see everything that Jesus is doing because they're over here worrying about if they're good enough or if they're doing the right thing or if they've earned God's love through the Pharisees. And Jesus is frustrated. He's like, listen, come to me. I have this truth and this opportunity and this relationship that is light and joy-filled and burdenless. It is not heavy. In fact, it is light. Take my yoke upon you. And so he invites these people who are weighed down with this idea of, I need to earn this, I need to run, I need to sprint in life, I need to do that. And Jesus brings this whole other concept of, hey, come to me. My yoke is easy, my burden is light. He invites you into a spiritual rest. And actually, when we step into spiritual rest, we also experience a physical rest. There's something that when you step into the presence of God and you experience the fullness of Him and you're allowing Him to speak to you, right? There's actually a physical response where our bodies are healed and our bodies are rested and our bodies are relaxed, right? He meets a physical need while we pursue a spiritual need of resting with God. Jesus offers not just a physical rest, but a deep soul-level peace where real rest is experienced. He invites the weary and burdened to come to Him for real rest. If you feel weary this morning or burdened, Jesus invites you into real rest. It's not just physical rest, but deep soul-level peace. His yoke, a symbol for following a teacher, is light because it's built on grace, not on performance. Jesus is gentle and humble, not harsh or demanding. He's inviting us to step into God's rhythm where we trust Him, then experience His peace and live freely in His kingdom both now and forever. It's not about striving and sprinting and running, but about walking with Jesus and finding real rest for our souls. He offers a different opportunity for people who feel very weary and burdened. He says, "Come and follow me." You see, people who are following Jesus have the opportunity to experience a rest that is life-changing. I believe that believers, followers of Jesus, Christians, should be people who know how to rest like champions. You want to know how to rest and relax and sit there and enjoy God's presence and be filled and physically rejuvenated? Look at a believer. Look at somebody who's modeling their life after Jesus and see how they do it. Actually, the book of Hebrews talks about this. Hebrews chapter 4, verse 9 says this: "There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did from His." What's interesting is that in verse 10, for anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works. It almost paints this picture that when we rest in God, the byproduct of that is, yes, we rest from our physical work, the things that need our attention, those moments that we could just give and give and give and give and give. When we enter into those moments of God's rest, we also get to rest from those daily tasks. Is anybody stressed out right now that you're literally thinking in this moment all the stuff you have to get done today? Like, it's weird. Like, you're like, Brad, hurry up. It's 11:05. I got stuff to do. And I know it's funny, but friends, I just am realizing that perhaps maybe one of the tactics of the enemy is just to keep us so incredibly busy. He doesn't have to throw a sin at you that tears your family apart. He just has to fill up your calendar that allows you never to sit with Him. He doesn't have to throw an addiction at you. He just has to sit there and give you so many things to think on that you really can't give time to Him, to Jesus. So I'm just wondering if, like, you and I need to look at our things that we're giving ourselves to, our calendars, and allowing God to speak into what we're putting in there. I don't do that often. Never. I don't do that. I need to. I wanted to say I don't do that often, so I look a little bit better to you all, but I really don't know if when I'm filling my calendar, be like, God, do you want me to give my time to this? Is this something that you want me to do right now? So, regular rhythms of rest in God's presence is a huge piece of what differentiates us, believers, from the rest of the world. When we learn that we need to prioritize rest, and we fill those times with God's presence, and we allow Him to rejuvenate us and fill us, that's what separates us from the rest of the world. That we know how to sit still in God's presence. So I'm just going to give you guys some practical things. What does it look like for you and I to rest in God's presence? I think, number one, we need to shift our cognitive and emotional thinking from this is optional to this is necessary. Like that rest is not something that's like, oh, if you've earned it or if you have enough time to do it, you do that. But you're like, this is actually priority one. So we need to shift our cognitive and emotional thinking from this is optional to this is necessary. It's actually something that God asks you to do. It's like we don't struggle at all with like not murdering people. I actually don't know. I'm sorry. I'm assuming. Like that rule in Scripture, we're like, yeah, that's an easy one. But when he tells you to rest, you're like, I got stuff to do, God. Right? Right? Number two. Advocating for our loved ones and friends who experience regular and intentional times of rest. I think if it was up to me and my decision, I probably would never do this. But so often my wife looks at me, she goes, you need to take some time for yourself, and I do the same for her. I think one of the best ways that we can love our spouses, if you're married, is to look at them and ask them, hey, will you do me a favor? Will you take some time for yourself today? I can't. I got to someone. It's like, actually, you need to for your sake and for the family's sake. Right? Your friends, this is awesome too. Some of my best friends, when I hang out with them, they know like, Brad, you haven't taken time for yourself. Like, you're right. So I think we can advocate for our loved ones, our families, our kids, right? Addie is 12, and like, goodness gracious, the stuff that she has to do throughout the week, I look at her sometimes like, just go up in your room and just like sit on your bed and draw. Just go and rest. So we need to advocate for our loved ones. Some of the ways that Laura and I do this is we'll sit there and it's like, all right, I'm going to take the kids for 4 hours and you rest, and then the next day we'll switch that, right? So just real practical ways to do that. I'll take this week an extra load of the chores, and you don't have to worry about that. Or you can ask and encourage rest in our friendships. Hey, Laura, will you go and take some time with your friends? And she'll look at me like, Brad, will you go and just enjoy your friendships around here? Number three, I think this is actually one of the most important ones, is that we need to calendar out our times of rest. Actually put them in our calendar. Like sit there and put that in a day, and then make sure you don't schedule things on top of that. On my calendar, I try to do this where I'm like, rest. And I know that if someone's like, hey, can we get coffee? Or if I got a project, I'm like, I can't do it in that window because I need to prioritize that. So literally put in my calendar times of rest as if it was an appointment that I need to get to. And then I think this is also important. They're all important. I wouldn't be telling you if it wasn't important. Taking this before the Lord and regularly and relying on the Holy Spirit to lead you into rest. This should be a conversation you have between you and God. God, how am I doing? Do I need to rest today? Do I need to rest this week? And just literally see what he says. Listen to how the Spirit leads you, and allow him space to actually, for him to, again, like Psalm 23 says, make you lie down in green pastures, and he leads you beside quiet waters. So talk with God about it. So an acronym that I want you guys to look at that helps remember that is SPACE, right? We're creating space, that we slow down, right? What am I giving my time and self to, and should I give my time and myself to that? That I need to pay attention to yourself, right? I need to pay attention to how I'm feeling and thinking. I need to be honest with myself if I'm just really tired, right? I need to ask God, right? What should I do? What do you want me to do? What should I take off my plate? What could I put on my plate? This should be a conversation, again, that we're having with God almost daily. I need to communicate my heart and my needs. So many of us feel like we're being super loving to the people around us when we don't communicate our needs. Like, that's actually not a loving thing to do, because you're not taking care of yourself, and thus you're not best for those people in your life that need you. Right? So I need to communicate what I'm thinking of. And then I need to expect big. I need to anticipate that good rest with God's presence will impact my life, my relationships, my physical health, my mental health, my emotional health. Right? That I expect that when I prioritize this, that I will see a return on that investment. I will see a change in my life. So I'm going to wrap up here in a minute or two. But one of the things that I want to show you guys is that this idea of rest, this idea of like taking time for ourselves, is a lot like building a fire. And I don't know if I should take offense to this or not, But as I walked in with this bag of wood, people legitimately asked me if I was going to start a fire in the sanctuary. And I was like, "No, maybe? No, I don't think so. Are you worried that I would do that?" It was funny. But as you build a fire, you have your wood, and we can so often think that in order to get a good fire, you need to stack these pieces of wood so incredibly tightly that obviously that it's the wood that creates the fire. And so you sit there and you load up as much logs and get them tight as you can in that. And what's interesting is that if I went to go and try to light this fire, almost as surely as a pail of water would, the fire would douse out. It would not catch. And you sit there and you're like, "But Brad, I have all the right pieces in here. I have all the wood. That's what catches on fire." But what's interesting is that if you know anything about building a fire, it's not just the presence of wood that creates fire, but actually the absence of wood as well. Then when we sit there and we leave space and we build it in a way that air can come and rejuvenate and spark that flame and feed that fire, that's actually how we create a roaring fire. And so we learn that it's not just the presence of wood, but it's also the absence of wood that creates the fire. And in the same way, our life is like this. That we can't just live our life stacking in all these pieces of wood because that's what I need to survive. That's what I need to thrive. That's what I need to see this thing ignite in my life. But we actually need the presence of open spaces as well in order to become that roaring fire. So as you look at your life, maybe ask yourself, have I packed my logs too tightly? Have I intentionally left space in between all the things that I'm juggling in order for this fire, my life, and I'm not just saying like a real fire, but like my life with God, right? My health to really erupt and be a good and beautiful thing? Am I allowing the absence of wood to be important in order to see that take off? And so, friends, as we finish this up, as we look at Jesus and his tired self, we realize that if Jesus prioritized rest, that perhaps maybe the way that we need to become more like Jesus is that we also prioritize rest. That we learn to take time for ourselves, that we actually be a little lovingly selfish with our time so that when we give our time to other things, we can give more of ourselves to them. And so, friends, maybe being more like Jesus is taking his lead and prioritizing rest in our daily and busy lives. There's two books that I want you to pay attention to. One of them I don't have because I realized the last time I talked about this, I gave it out. But one of them is The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer. It's a fun book. If you are a reader, this is a great resource that you can take a look at. Super easy read, and so you can pick this up on Amazon. Also, Emotionally Healthy Spirituality by Pete Scazzaro also talks about this as well. And so I consider that an investment in ourselves, that you are investing in who you are as a person, as a follower of Jesus. And so please take a look at those if that is something that piques your interest. And so, friends, let's pray as we close, and we'll keep moving forward. So, Holy Spirit, I thank you for just how you're leading us